So she came from an outdoor education background and is now licensed forester and remains in outreach working with forestry extension at University of Connecticut to present science and new ideas to other foresters. So before we start, I would like to mention that this program is organized by AstroSTEM Labs in partnership with Grand River Malaria Association and NPHIL Young Thinkers. We would like to thank our sponsor for this event, Vipin Sivadashan.
Okay. Do you want me to?
Yeah, you can start now.
Oh, okay. Should I share my screen? Can I do that?
Are you able to do that?
Yes, I think so. Can you see a PowerPoint presentation? All right. Okay, so my name is Amanda Bunce. I work at the University of Connecticut in the United States, in Connecticut. And I work on a lot of research projects here, mostly managing forests considering climate change. So for those of you that don't know what forest management is, I put a little definition of silviculture up here. Silviculture is the art and science of growing trees and forests to meet the many needs and the values of society. So we need forests for a lot of things. They filter our air and water. They provide wildlife habitat. Timber, we build things out of the wood that grows from trees and forests. And recreation, we use forests for hiking and for all kinds of things like that. And there's lots of other things that we use forests for. So that's why I work in the field that I work in, is to protect and help to grow these forests, all kinds of forests. Adaptive silviculture is a type of silviculture that I've gotten into lately, and that is specifically growing trees and forests in a way that improves their ability to resist changes or be resilient to these changes. So usually what we're talking about when we talk about adaptive silviculture is helping forests to adapt to climate change. So the things that climate change is doing to our earth are affecting forests. And forests can't like get up and move if things are becoming a problem for them. So, they need to be able to grow differently or to be able to handle the things that are happening to them. And there are things that we can do as people that manage the forests, that work in the forests, that work with them. There are things that we can do to help the forests be able to handle those changes. So this is me. I spend a lot of time in trees. I put a lot of sensors in trees so I can measure stuff. I work with a lab group. This is them in one of our experimental forests. So I work with a lot of people, and we all work on, sometimes we work on tiny projects. They're all connected. Sometimes we work on tiny parts of one big project. And this is Trixie, my best hiking partner there. I do a lot of hiking when I'm not working on science with trees. I go hiking in the trees a lot. So I value trees for lots of reasons. Okay. So if we're talking about trees, there are lots of different trees all over the world, and I want to be clear about the ones that I work with. So this is a map that shows biomass, which is just like how much tree stuff is in any given area. So you can see that dark blue area is where there's a lot of biomass. So there's a lot of tree stuff there, a lot of wood growing in the forests. And I work in Connecticut. You can see where that red arrow goes to. There's a lot of trees there for sure. The lighter green areas are where trees are smaller. That happens, trees are smaller and fewer where it's really cold. So like way up in the north of Canada. And then there's areas where there aren't a lot of trees, like out in the Midwest of the United States, the landscape is better there for grasses and bushes, and trees don't grow so much. So there's not a lot of forest there. So that hopefully gives you an idea of where I am working on my trees. This is a different map of how old forests are in North America. So you can see we have some really, really old forests in the northwestern area, especially up in Canada there. That's forest that's been growing for a really, really long time. No people have really messed with it, probably because it's very hard to mess with forest over in that area. You can see down in the southeast of the United States, that's very young forest. That's because that's an area that we use for wood. So we harvest that area a lot. we harvest it regularly and let it grow back and harvest it again and let it grow back and harvest it again. So there's different ranges of forest all over the North America. There's different types of forest too. Where I work down in Connecticut, there's a lot of oak and hickory trees. Those have big broad leaves, and the trees are called deciduous, which means they drop their leaves every winter. Up in Quebec area, there's a lot of boreal forest. So that means spruce trees and fir trees, all the types with needles. They don't drop their needles during the winter time. They keep them on all winter long. Those are coniferous trees. They grow cones. That's what coniferous means. So lots of different types of forest, lots of different ages of forest all over the world. And hopefully you have an idea where I'm working in Connecticut there. So what is climate change doing to our forests? Climate change in the Northeast of the United States has resulted in increased temperatures since 1901. On average, our temperatures have increased by about 2.4 degrees. The minimum temperature that we get down to in the winter is up by about 3. The maximum temperatures that we get up to in the summer are up by about 2. Winter is changing the most, which is interesting. So the winter temperature is up a lot more. The fall temperatures are still up, but not quite as much as the winter. Precipitation is another thing that climate change has done. So precipitation is snow and rain. And you can see by this map here of the Northeast United States, the dark colors are where precipitation has increased by almost 12 inches. So an extra foot of rain is falling a year in those areas. In Connecticut, you can see it's pretty green. So we're getting anywhere from 4 to 8 more inches of rain than we normally get every year. Another thing that's happening with precipitation is that it's falling, the rain or snow is falling in more single events, more extreme events. So we're getting a lot of really heavy rainstorms or a lot of really big snowstorms with a lot of deep snow. And then, and since we're getting all that precipitation all at once, sometimes we don't get any later on. So we're not only becoming a lot wetter, just the landscape is getting wetter, we also have a lot more periods of dry times. So even though we get more rain, it's happening all at once. So there's other times of the year where we don't get any. Sea level rise is also a big deal. So off of the coast of New England where I am there, the sea level is up almost a foot since 100 years ago. That's obviously really dangerous to trees along the coast because sometimes they can handle a flood, but what they can't handle is salt water. So when the sea brings in the salt water and that rises up and creeps inland, that kills all the coastal forests. So we got to be on the lookout for that sort of thing too. What else is climate change doing? So when we talk about climate change going into the future, what might happen? We talk about a couple different types of scenarios. So these maps over here on the right show changes in temperatures that are going to happen. And the more yellow maps, that column is if climate change isn't that crazy, if nothing too crazy happens, we're still going to see increases in that yellow range of 2 to 4 degrees on average. The temperature is going to rise up. If things do get crazy, if we continue producing a lot of emissions all over the world, if a lot more carbon dioxide gets into the atmosphere, things are going to get a little crazier and we're going to see much higher increases of temperature. So in the 8 to 12 degrees up range. So that's why we put out these different scenarios, these different possibilities of what the future might hold, because we can't know for sure what's going to happen. There's a lot of different factors involved, right? But we can make some pretty solid guesses. And we know that even if we do our best to curb climate change, we're still going to see some increases in that temperature. So we're going to see rises in temperature. Precipitation is probably going to be increasing as well for us in the Northeast United States and in Toronto area too. It's going to be a little wetter probably. And we're going to still expect those heavy precipitation events. And we're going to expect continued increase of sea level too. So the future has some variability, but these are some things that we can definitely expect. So what does that mean for trees? Trees are going to start to experience longer growing seasons. So they're going to have more time to put out their leaves and soak in the sun and photosynthesize and do what trees do, right? It's estimated that by the year 2100, they're going to have an extra 3 to 7 weeks to do that sort of thing, which is great. That's an opportunity for trees, also all other plants. So extra time for them to grow. But it does present a couple challenges. Firstly, if they start budding out earlier in the winter, because the winter's just not so cold anymore, they are still vulnerable to those snap frosts that we get in the early spring. So if a tree puts out a vulnerable little leaf in the early spring and then suddenly it freezes again, it loses that leaf and it has to start all over again. So that's kind of a challenge for trees. Trees will also experience phenological shifts. So phenology is the science of when the leaves come out, when plants start doing what they're going to do, when the ecosystem starts moving. And as the weather changes, the trees are going to change the timing of when they're doing stuff. All the plants are going to change the timing of when they do stuff. And we're going to get pollinators. So bugs are going to start coming out at different times too. And if they don't get the same cues, if they start coming out at different times, you might have plants that bloom and their pollinators aren't ready to get out there and pollinate yet. So the bees might still be asleep, or the bees might wake up and they're looking for food and the trees haven't put out their flowers yet. So we're looking at potential mismatches like that in the ecosystems, mismatches in timing specifically. And that precipitation that I talked about is going to be another challenge. So the trees have longer to grow, but they might also be growing during some risky times when there's a lot of those heavy events are possibly going to flood them out or something like that, or they're going to be growing through those dry times when a lot more water is gone from the heavy precipitation events and we're in a little dry spell. The plants are going to need to weather that sort of situation too. So there's going to be a shorter winter with less snow, which really isn't great for trees. We're going to see 30 to 70% decreases in the snowpack over the winter by the year 2100. And a decreased snowpack means that the soil is going to be warmer. Roots could be damaged by frost if the soil is not cold enough that the roots have protected themselves. And again, those phenological shifts, the altered timing, is going to change stuff too. If the roots start growing in that warmer soil and then they get hit by a winter frost, it could pose a problem for them. Less snow is also going to mean more rain. So we're going to see possible flash flooding. Flash flooding happens when the ground doesn't let the rainwater enter it. That happens when it's frozen in the winter. So if the surface of the ground is cold and frozen and rain happens, it all runs off. It could go flash flood somewhere. So that can be pretty dangerous. This is a picture of a flood through a forest in Hubbard Brook in New Hampshire, the United States. Also, less snow hanging around into the spring means we might see declines in water that's hanging around in the summer. So snow is sort of a storage facility for water. It lets it out into the spring, and then there's more water for in the summer. So there's going to be less water later in the year if we don't have that snowpack. Another problem is mud season. I don't know if you guys have ever seen big equipments running around in forests trying to move stuff. They can't do that when it's really muddy because it churns up the soil and it messes up all the dirt. And we don't want that to happen because a lot of important processes are happening in the dirt. Tree roots and bugs are doing their important things. So we try not to mess up the soil too much. But if we have a lot of mud season, if everything's wet all the time, there's not going to be a lot of window of opportunity for us to run our equipment around in the forest. So that's a bit of a problem too. Increased carbon dioxide is another thing climate change is going to do. So, we breathe oxygen in and breathe out carbon dioxide, and trees breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. So when trees soak up extra carbon dioxide, because we put all the extra carbon dioxide in the air, right? That's one of the causes of climate change. All that extra carbon dioxide is basically food or air for trees that they can use to increase their photosynthesis. So a lot of trees might be able to do a lot more growing. However, all of these other challenges and problems might limit their ability to do that. So for example, this is a picture of a couple trees in one of the forests that I work in, where we had a whole bunch of trees just die off because one of the phenological processes got them. So this bug called the spongy moth, you can see it over here on the right-hand side. There's a lot of caterpillars on that one tree. For like 2 or 3 years around here, the spongy moth just sort of took off and was everywhere, eating the leaves off of all the trees. And that happened because of sort of the changes in the climate made it better for the spongy moth to be able to do what it does. So their populations kind of exploded, and they ate a lot of leaves off a lot of trees, and a lot of trees were unable to recover. So because of all the different things involved with climate change, these trees maybe had an opportunity to grow more because of carbon dioxide, but instead they died off because of the changes in the bug timing. So a lot of things are up in the air. We are uncertain kind of about how a lot of things will play out. Nothing is that simple. Habitat suitability is a big deal for trees. So where is a tree able to grow? That's going to change because the changes in temperatures and precipitation, those will change where a tree is able to grow. So on the left-hand side is a map of balsam firs, and the left side of that map with the more red on it, that's where balsam firs can grow now. In that dark red spot is where it's great habitat for balsam firs. But you can see in the future, in one of the scenarios of the future, it's going to be lesser habitat. That spot that was bright red before is now the yellow color, which is not super great habitat anymore. So in the future, the balsam fir is going to lose some places where it can grow. Same with the sugar maple. The sugar maple grows all over the northeast of the United States there, some really great habitat where it's bright red. And then you can see in the second map of the sugar maple there, that habitat is going to become less good for sugar maples in the future. And this is a map of forest types. So you can see there's some blue in the first one. That's the spruce fir and other sort of conifer, cold weather type plants, type of trees. And they've got some habitat up in northern Maine there, the north of the Northeast United States. But that habitat pretty much goes away in all of our future scenarios. So things are not going to be good for the spruce and fir forest types. We've got a lot of spruce and firs up in Canada, and probably they'll still have some good habitat up there, but it's going to be less. Their better habitat for them is going to be farther north. So let me talk to you about some of the experiments that I got involved in so that I could better help all of these plants. So as a forester, it's sort of my job to take care of trees. So I got into a lot of research projects to see if I could help better take care of the trees. So my lab got involved with something called the Adaptive Silviculture for Climate Change project, which is a network of experiments on forests. Silvicultural trials are just experiments in the forest, experiments with trees. And this map is a map of places where they're doing this all over North America. You can see a bunch in the United States and some up in Canada. There's even more up in Canada now. This is a little bit of an old map. And what this project does is finds a chunk of forest, and then we got to work in that forest, and we're going to work towards 3 different goals. So we try to manage the forest so that it can better resist the changes of climate change. We help it to improve its defenses, right? Maintain those conditions that it already has, keep the forest as it is. However, we can help it do that. And then we try to make up a resilience experiment. So we try to manage the forest to change it a little bit such that it can sort of take a hit from climate change, but then bounce back. So we do what we can do in the forest to help the trees come back after they've been flooded or hit by spongy moths or something like that. And then a transition treatment. So this is the third version of the experiment, is we want to change the forest a little bit so that we change it so that it is better able to handle what we think things are going to be like in the future. So that's all these spots on this map. People have put all 3 of these actions into action in the forest and tried them out. There's some pictures here from Vermont, which is a little bit north of where I am, where they sort of cut down a lot of the forest so that it will grow back, right? Took out a lot of the forest so that it can bounce back, sort of heading off what we think climate change is going to do to it. And specifically in these pictures, they also planted a lot of trees. They planted a lot of trees that weren't there before, types that weren't there before, that we think are going to be able to better handle the coming conditions. So, and this is a forest in Connecticut that we chose to work with. So it's called Mohegan State Forest, sort of in the middle of the state. And we invited a lot of people to work on this experiment with us. So all kinds of people that work in the woods around the state. We were like, get together, look at some maps of this forest, check out some charts of what kinds of trees are here, and tell us what you think we can do to improve the resistance of this forest, to make it more resilient to climate change, or to change it so that it will be better suited for what's coming in the future. We had a lot of people tune in online. And this is my boss here with an iPad looking at some armillaria, which is a fungus on the base of a tree. And he's just, he's showing off some parts of the forest there to the people that were able to tune in to the virtual meeting, to tune in online. So we were able to share this and get a lot of opinions from a lot of people, which was pretty cool. This is a map of the forest. So we decided to put our 3 different treatments in these 3 spots. The blue spot is where we made the forest more resistant. The green one is where we made it more resilient. And the orange one there is where we transitioned the forest to be something that's going to be more suitable for the future. And with any science experiment, you need a good control. So we have a spot that we're not changing. That one's going to stay as is. And we're going to check that one out in comparison to the ones we did change in the future. So this was where we did the resistance treatment. So where we made the forest more resistant. The whole idea here was to keep all of the different types of things in the forest, all the different types of trees, keep them all present in the forest. We cut down some trees for sure, because we wanted to open some things up to get some airflow in there, make things a little healthier. But we cut down things that were an even amount of the stuff that was there. So we cut down some small ones and some big ones, leaving ourselves a variety of small ones and big ones still there. So this way we were able to protect all of the stuff that we had there and make it healthier. The resilience treatment, we wanted to create the conditions for our oak and hickory trees to sort of take a hit and bounce back. So we took out patches of trees. You can see in that upper photo, there's like a big circle hole in the canopy in the tree tops there. So that's a patch that we cut out. And that patch is how oak trees grow back. So oak trees don't do very good if they're all underneath other oak trees. So we cut some patches in the canopy, then baby oak trees are able to bounce up from the floor of the forest to get going, get themselves up into that canopy. So that's how we made this part of the forest more resilient. And the transition part, we decided to focus our transition part where we had a lot of dead trees, but we also had a lot of baby trees on the forest floor. So we had a lot of dead oaks mostly, but we also had a lot of oak seedlings growing on the floor. So our transition spot, we cut even bigger patches in the canopy. We cut down a lot of those dead trees and we cut down some live trees too. And what that allowed is a lot of sunlight's going to come in the springtime, and all of those little oaks on the floor are going to go crazy. They're going to grow right back up. We have a lot of white-tailed deer here. If you guys have some deer, probably some moose up there too. Deer and moose love to eat baby trees. So another thing that we did was drop a lot of branches and small trees on the ground and just leave them there. We call that stuff slash, all the branches and small trees and things that you leave on the ground. We call that slash. And we left it there on purpose to sort of protect a lot of baby oak seedlings from the deer. You can hardly see them in this picture, but I put some orange arrows where we put little flags where all of our little baby oak trees were. So we can come back in the springtime and see how they're doing. Speaking of coming back and seeing how everything is doing, a big part of this experiment is this long-term monitoring. So we got to come back to all these forest plots every year, and we're going to measure all the same things. This plot diagram is a little tough to read, but what it says to me is a map of everything that I need to measure every year. So we have a spot, that pink spot in the middle is our permanent plot center. And I know where that is out in the woods. So I can go find that spot every year. And then in a big circle around it, I measure what trees are there. I measure what small trees are there, what saplings. We call small trees saplings. And then we also measure the seedlings. That's the little baby trees on the ground. So we measure all the types of trees. We also measure the ground cover. So if there's grasses or mosses or other fluffy leafy things growing on the ground, we count all that. And coarse woody debris too. So we count the dead wood that's on the ground. That's an important part of the ecosystem too, because that is gonna slowly degrade. It's gonna return carbon and nutrients to the soil. And it also provides a habitat for a lot of salamanders and newts and worms and bugs and stuff. That degrading wood provides a lot of habitat there. So we're going to come back every year and we're going to count all of those things. This picture is Andrew, one of the guys that works in my lab, and you can't tell, but he's holding up a prism, which is a little piece of glass that is it's a measuring tool we use to count trees. So one more experiment that I'm involved in that I'm going to tell you about real quick is this one about trees falling down on power lines. So we have this problem a lot in Connecticut where I live. A lot of our forests are right next to the road. And when trees fall, it's a danger to the power lines, it's a danger to cars and the road, and it's a danger to people. We live pretty close to our trees right here. So we've had a couple hurricanes in the past few years that have been really dangerous and have shut down power in many areas for long periods of time. So how can we take care of the forests such that this doesn't happen? We're never going to make it not happen, but how can we make it happen less? So we came up with this idea where we're gonna take a look at our roadside forests. We're gonna pick out which trees are risky, which ones are like dead or leading towards the road, something like that. We're definitely going to take those ones out, and then we're also going to take out ones that are sort of in the way of trees that are really good. So we're going to identify some really good, really straight, really strong trees. And then we're gonna manage the forest so that we take out the bad ones and we take out the ones that are in the way, and we give extra space and extra resources so those strong ones can grow even better. And that's how we're going to manage the forest along our roadside. And we've done that in 11 places across my state of Connecticut here. And this is just a picture of what one of those roadside places looked like before we did anything. This is after. So we went in there and we identified all the bad trees and took them out. And then we identified the really good trees and made a lot of space around them. And you can see that it came back 2 years, like there's a lot of green right there. So it's not like we did a lot of damage to the forest. What we did was sort of prune it. We inspired it to grow back, to bounce back and come back better. So that's what we've got going on there, is a forest with trees in it that have a lot more space and a lot more resources for themselves. So they grow straight, they grow tall, they're less likely to fall over on the power lines. Yeah. And one thing that we did in a couple of these spots is measure the biomechanics of the trees. So the biomechanics means how the tree moves back and forth, how it sways in the wind. We've got a little diagram of a tree swaying back and forth here. So you can see there's different parts of a tree and they all have different ways that they sway. But we mostly focus on the biggest part, the trunk of the tree and how it goes back and forth. And this instrument here, this is me putting an inclinometer onto a tree. You can see it looks like a little circuit board with a bubble in the middle. And it measures the incline, so how much a tree is tilted over. And using that data, I can make this little map in the orange down here. You can see that this tree, this is like looking at the tree from above. So you can see that this tree moved the most to the southeast. I think this is during 1 hour of time. So during this hour, this tree moved a lot to the southeast. It was hanging out over there a lot. It swayed a little bit to the northwest and the southwest and the northeast, but it swayed the most towards that southeast area. So we take a look at where it's swaying, how far it's swaying, and we can also measure how fast it's swaying because trees go back and forth. So I can do that with all of these trees. And you can see here in this first column was an hour of swaying data for each of these 3 trees. And then after we did that stuff to the forest, after we gave these trees the space and the extra resources, we measured them again, how they move in the wind. And then we measured them again 4 years later. These graphs aren't really, some of them are. If you look at that orange one down there on the bottom, so you can see how it moved a lot in the beginning. And then the second year right after, it was also moving quite a lot. So it didn't slow down how much it moved, but it did sort of become more circular, right? So that was kind of one of the ideas that we were hoping for. If we gave a tree more space, would it maybe move a little more evenly? And maybe that would help it to grow straighter and stay stronger. So that one did turn out to be a little more circular after we cut down some trees next to it, which was good. 4 years later, we measured that tree again, and it kind of looks like it's starting to head off in an oval pattern again. But what it is actually it's a lot smaller. The movement is a lot smaller than it was before. So maybe this tree is starting to sway in a less circular pattern again, but we've got it to move less far. So that also makes it less dangerous, less likely to fall over. So that's, yeah. So that's the idea of that project. Call that one the Biomechanics project. Okay, so that's the end of the experiments that I'm working on right now to help adapt these trees to climate change. Yeah, and these are some of my sponsors on the bottom here. I work with UConn. I work with the Adaptive Silviculture for Climate Change project. I work with the state facilities in Connecticut, in my state. So our state owns a lot of the forest land here, and that's what we work in. And I also work with a lot of organizations across North America to sort of get this work done and to share it with everybody. Yeah, so that's me. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and ask you guys if you have any questions. Is that? I could, oh, I see a question. These as experiments. How is this plan to be used on large scale and when will it be implemented? Okay, so yeah, so both of these are experiments that we're working with here in our lab on a very small scale. The biomechanics one, we have the biomechanics being measured in just 3 roadside sites in Connecticut. But what we're planning to do with that is to talk to larger communities. So first, some different towns in Connecticut. We have a couple of towns that are interested in doing this. And then we're going to scale that up to the entire state. There's hundreds of thousands of miles of roads in our state alone that have these big forests next to them. So they suffer these dangers because climate change is increasing the amount of storms that we're seeing. So we're seeing an increase in this problem with trees falling down on the power lines. So everybody in the state is sort of interested in this kind of solution. So we think it'll be pretty easy to sort of scale that one up to ultimately start talking to more people and larger areas to implement the forest management technique that we use on the roadside there. The tricky part of that will be actually getting the work done. So everybody's going to be interested in it. Everybody already is interested in it, but Roadside forests are not necessarily owned by a town or by a public entity of any kind. They're often owned by just private citizens who own that chunk of forest next to the road. So we really need to get everyone together to talk about how to manage roadside forests. So it's not going to be doing the experiment everywhere or doing it in a large area that's going to be the problem, but it's going to be talking to everybody in an area and getting them on the same page about what we should. So that's going to be one of the challenges of scaling that one up. For the other experiment, the adaptive silviculture for climate change one, that is funny because we actually scaled that one down. A lot of the places that one is being done in, where they're trying the resistance, resilience, and transition treatments, those are in huge areas of forest where they take like 25 acres and repeat the same treatment 4 times over hundreds of acres of forest land. We had to scale it down to do it in our tiny state where we can't find 25 acres of forest to work with at a time. So our plots are 5 to 7 acres. So we scaled that one down quite a bit. But it was to make sure that the same principles, the same ideas would hold true in our area where we have smaller chunks of forest. So we can see, we can compare our results with the results of the people that are doing it in the big forested areas. And then we'll get that out to the world and start telling people what we think they should do. So yeah, that's how we scale those experiments up and down a little bit. Someone asked, what made you be a forester? I love trees. My dad is actually a forester, but in Connecticut, you can get licensed to be a forester at 3 different levels. Level 1 is you're licensed to use a chainsaw safely. Level 2 is you're licensed to supervise other people who are using a chainsaw and to make sure they're doing it safely. My dad is a level 2 forester. So I was like, I got to be level 3, right? So I am a level 3 forester in Connecticut, which means not only can I use a chainsaw and supervise other people who are using chainsaws, but I can write management plans. So I can take into account an entire forested ecosystem and write an elaborate plan on how we're going to take care of it to accomplish different goals. There's lots of goals that people have for their forest land. Sometimes it's to grow trees to use as timber. Sometimes it's to grow trees that are protecting mushrooms that they want to harvest. Sometimes it's to grow trees to protect the water quality in the area. So I have to be able to know about all of these things and all of the different trees and how they all work together in the ecosystem. And just wanting to know all those things is really what made me want to be a forester. That was how I got the answers to my own questions about how forest ecology works, what's going on in the woods. So that's why I'm a forester. How is controlled forest fire different from these methods? That's an interesting question. So we considered using a controlled forest fire in one of our experiments. I think it was the resilience treatment. One of the things that we need to do to help baby oak trees bounce back, to get baby oak trees to grow up from the floor of the forest and become part of the canopy, sometimes you need to wipe out the competition, right? So one of the ways that a person could do that, that a forester can do that, is to send a low ground fire through an area. It'll take out a lot of different species like maples and beeches. It'll also take out the top part of a baby oak tree, so an oak seedling, but it will leave the roots. Oak trees are actually used to that. They can handle fire. So if you send that little fire through a forest, you wipe out the competition, but you let the oak trees come out. So fire is definitely one thing that we considered using to help bounce back those baby oak trees. But in our area, I believe I mentioned it gets pretty wet here and it's only getting wetter with climate change. It's actually really hard for us to get one of those low grade fires going right now. So out west in the United States, they've got a lot of fire problems right now. Fires spark and get out of hand all the time. But right here in my area, we actually have the opposite. We can't get a fire going right now, even if we're trying to use it on purpose for helpful methods, it's really hard to get it going. So we didn't use that particular tool when we were creating these experiments, but we could have. It could have been something that we chose. When and where is that kind of method used? Yeah, so those controlled fire methods, like I said, they're usually used to control competition. So if you want an oak tree to grow, you can send a low-grade fire there and it'll take out the competition for the oak trees. We also use controlled fires to take out invasive species. So that's another thing that climate change has sort of made worse. We have a lot of invasive species in our forests. So bushes, trees, plants that didn't come from here, but then they get planted one way or another in the forest and they sort of take over. So an invasive species is a problem if it's taking over the landscape from other species that we think should be here. So Japanese barberry, for example, is a little bush. It's very pointy, but just because I don't like it because it's pointy doesn't make it an invasive species. The problem with it is that it produces these berries that are like not as nutritious for birds as our native species. So if it outcompetes our native species and produces its berries, the birds don't have the nutrition that they normally have available to them in the forest. So that's really where the barberries become a problem. They're also a barberry is a great habitat for ticks and Lyme disease, which is also an increasing problem in our area. So we can use controlled fire to take out barberry plants. Sometimes, because I said it's pretty wet here most of the time, and we have trouble getting a low grade fire running through the woods. What we'll do sometimes is put we use a drip fire. So you have a backpack with like propane in it and a torch that sort of drips fire out. So you can walk along in the woods and very carefully direct your fire towards just the part of the barberry bush where the plant meets the roots. You direct your fire right there, and that usually does a good job to wipe out the bush. And then you get followed by someone who has a backpack full of water, just in case something gets out of hand. So that's a couple ways that we can use controlled fire in my area. Out west, where the fires are a really big problem, they can actually use a controlled fire to contain an out of control fire. So if they use a controlled fire in a certain area and burn up all the loose, dry wood that might be fuel for a fire, if they can control that and put it out, then when the uncontrolled fire comes along, it's got nothing to burn. So sometimes they can use controlled fires to control uncontrolled fires. Like I said, that's not too much of a big deal where we are, not really a problem here, but fire is a pretty crazy thing. Can your experiments be implemented in other climates like tropical? Absolutely. So the storm-wise forest management, the roadside forest management, is based on some very basic principles of growing trees, right? So we know that trees that are compromised and leaning towards the road are going to fall towards the road someday. So that can certainly be applied anywhere. The other thing that we do for that, besides just taking out bad trees, is we take out trees around trees that we think are really good. So the idea for any given tree is that if you give it enough space and enough resources, enough soil nutrients, if you wipe out some of its competition, then that tree will be able to grow strong. It will be able to grow symmetrically. And also the wind that blows a tree and makes it sway back and forth, the more wind that a tree experiences, the more wind it can handle. It's kind of like a workout for the tree. So all of these principles, if we give the tree more nutrients, more space, more light, and we push it around with the wind a little more by opening up the area around it, then we create this stronger tree that can still provide shade along the roadside and be beautiful like we want it to, but won't fall down or is less likely to fall down. So those are just really basic tree growing principles that can be applied in any type of forest, for sure. Yeah, there's not a lot of not a lot of direct comparisons we can make between the tropical climates and things that grow here. But a lot of the principles are what we can carry over. And a lot of times that's what drives our experiments. So if we find something to be true in a tropical forest, let's try it out, see if it is also true here with our forests, right? So that drives our experiments sometimes, tells us what we need to study. Yeah. Cool. I got a thank you there. You're very welcome. All right. If there's no more questions, you guys have my email address if you need to send me any questions.
Yeah. So if there's no more questions, then I think we can conclude today's session. So again, I just want to thank you for being here and explaining a new topic to us. And thank you to everyone for joining. And again, thank you to our sponsors. And yeah.
Thank you. This was pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah. So like mentioned before, if anyone has any more questions, they can just email you. Does everyone have your email address?
It's amanda.bunce@uconn.edu if you need it.
I guess we can conclude for today.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It was great to learn about this program too, and to see all the other videos you guys have up. This is pretty awesome stuff. All right. Okay. I'm going to sign out then. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.